about that. But really, the project, as you can see from the screen, is examining technology use in North American EAP, English for Academic Purpose programs. And I'll talk, this is our team, mostly from York. And I'll talk about the research background, some rationale on why we're focusing on this study and this aspect in EAP, looking at technology use. And I'll do a quick lit review with you on the use of technology in language teaching and learning and why it's increasingly relevant for a range of purposes, and certainly for EAP teaching context. And we'll look at the research, the questions, the methods, the theoretical frameworks we're using. And then I'll talk about the preliminary findings. And I'm saying they're preliminary because we haven't done a lot of data analysis yet. We're still finishing collecting the data. We've done survey data and analyzed that quite a bit, but we're still working on the site visit data, which is a big part of the project. So we're integrating that. I've tried to integrate a little bit, a few findings in the site visit data into this, but we'll talk about what are the perceived benefits from teachers, administrators, from students on technology use in EAP, what are current uses and pedagogical approaches, which is a big question mark because that's one of our findings, that teachers often don't know, how do I change my pedagogy when I'm using technology, or should I, this type of thing. What are constraints? And we'll look at teacher belief systems, and that's a big part of my previous research. My dissertation on intercultural teaching and learning looked at teacher beliefs towards intercultural teaching and learning also. So it's a big interest area of mine. And then we'll talk about emerging issues that we see developing in this research that we'll look more at in the analysis. And then I'd be happy to take questions and comments. Okay, so the reason is going to minimize some of the participants here so I can see the screen and we can see it. The interest in looking at technology in EAP really is because of the dramatic increases in international student enrollments that have happened and that continue to happen in post-secondary institutions like universities and colleges in North America and elsewhere. You know, and these stats sort of tell the story that from 2011, international university student enrollment has doubled to 8%, and the Canadian government wants to continue that, largely because of funding cuts and constraints, and that international students, as we know, pay more fees, so they are an important resource in the post-secondary context. And this intense internationalization bridging programs developing in many places is really deepening interest in the use of technology for different pathways for students to complete these bridging programs and IEP programs, intensive English programs. So that is a big part of it. The other factor, as you've come across in the Kessler article, you know, is this time we're living in, which is really, we have these unprecedented opportunities as language teachers to really communicate with others in a range of authentic cultural and linguistic contexts. And we're living in this profound communicative shift that's happening with technology. I mean, a lot of the communication that we undertake with people tends to be technology mediated nowadays. You know, and this is, I think, it still surprises me in TESOL programs and language teacher ed programs how often this is missed, because really so much of our communication is happening using technology, but we don't tend to teach communication in those genres, like in texting and sort of workplace SMS, you know, video conferencing, etc., where we do have different codes, different genres appearing in which we need to communicate. And, you know, there is this expectation among students that this is how I communicate on a daily basis. Why is this not in the classroom? Or why is this not meeting sort of my social sort of communicative needs? So this match that needs to occur. And you may have people heard this term 21st century skills? Yeah, it's big in the K-12 context and also in post-secondary context, and it really has resonance with EAP, teaching and learning, because it really is focusing on information and communication, digital literacy, communication, collaboration, teamwork skills, these aspects, innovative thinking, critical research skills, informational literacy, these types of things. So these skills that overlap to some degree with language teaching, but certainly overlap with EAP teaching, because we're also working with academic skills in those contexts. So it is certainly a relevant area that is largely sort of fueled by technology or facilitated with technology. And there is the profound communication shift that I was talking about earlier, and these are stats that probably won't surprise you, but yet they're surprising when we see them sort of quantitatively. The number of the 5 billion texters in the world on average, each American, and I expect this probably transfers to us here in Canada, sends and receives on average 94 text messages per day. All of them from Enrica. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No guilt, no shaming.
With my kids making fun that I do like that.
And the average person spends around 2 hours on social media every day. I mean, obviously there are people who spend far less and don't have Facebook accounts. Some of my friends don't, and I envy them. But the average American spends between 4 and 5 hours on their mobile device, some 25% constantly online. So I mean, these are really shifting the way we communicate and the expectations around communication and about teaching and learning, which we'll talk about, because this factors into boundaries that we need to set up as teachers when we're using technology that can be daunting when we don't have certain boundaries. And the impact of this communication shift on how we communicate is quite interesting, because there is familiarity with shorter, more efficient, more frequent communication, more informal types of genre when we communicate. And any of us who have marked papers like essays, and you see a capital U instead of YOU written in the paper, we see that genre transfer. And I have had that a number of times teaching in EAP contexts, from students. And we have the opportunity to express, and I use this term curate because I think this is often more accurate, that we can curate our tone explicitly in these asynchronous genres through email or other modalities where we're communicating with other people online using emoticons and culturally and contextually informed codes that often aren't taught. And that's why there tends to be a gap sometimes. We're increasingly using video communication like we're using right now, with the use of voice and face, but we don't see the rest of the body usually. And there's this blurring of physical and virtual worlds, the use of augmented and virtual reality, which are being spoken of more and more in education and life. There is this blurring of these spaces. The impact of tech on language education, as we talked about, there are sort of new forms of genre. There are new forms of language use also. There are new ways to interact socially, new notions of community, and that's a big barrier often when we teach online, because we don't feel as connected to people sometimes as we do face-to-face, and the sense of belonging. And there is a movement towards greater student autonomy that happens in online spaces, where we have expectations that students will learn on their own, when often that's not a given, and students need to be supported with that. And that can be a barrier in these online spaces. So what does the research say about learning online? This won't be surprising to any of you. This idea of flexible learning pathways, which is one of the appeal for institutions to deliver courses online or hybrid or blended forms, because it can save space, it can save money with booking space in an online, in a sort of institutional sort of context. It can increase efficiencies, and I put some question marks around that because I'm not convinced of this. Okay, but the argument is that it does create efficiencies. And certainly from a linguistics, a language learning perspective, you know, it can create this multimodal learning. We have learning visually, kinesthetically, auditorily. So we have these different modalities that we can work with online learning. So we can meet different learning styles. It's self-paced. We can have asynchronous work where students who may need to hear that audio clip can listen to it 10 times and then get it. Whereas you may have other students who just need to listen to it once or twice. So it gives that differentiation in instruction that often is challenging in a face-to-face class. Can target integrated skills. You know, when I started in technology in the 90s, researching it, you know, we were just writing and reading online. We couldn't do audio or video because of bandwidth issues, but now we can do that. And so there are many different tools teachers can use. We can use screencasting to give feedback to students on papers, which is really cool because you can nuance your feedback and talk about positive stuff and areas to work on with your voice. So like having a self-paced tutoring session, which is really cool. And there are lots of assessment tools that can be used. If you use a learning management system, we can track where learners are, what they're doing, if they're disengaging, and then we can reach out and contact them. You know, so we can do all those things with technology. And one of the areas that is very relevant for EAP and sort of post-secondary context, but also other language learning contexts, are these Web 2.0 tools, these collaborative tools that we have, like Google Docs, things that are used in professional contexts, that are transferable skills that aren't just language learning skills, but also transferable and used in occupation-specific language teaching and can be quite relevant. Writing activities have been reported to increase proficiency in writing because we get a lot of practice. We get extensive practice. We have different audiences we're writing to. Vocabulary use, confidence, autonomy, engagement, but I put a waiver here, and that these activities have to be well structured. You know, again, it all falls back to the pedagogy that technology won't naturally do it for us. We've got to really structure and use sound pedagogy with these tools. You know, and these collaborative tools can build this community, this connection with other students in these online spaces. And that is a big factor that often is a bit of a sort of catch a bit of a sort of vacuum sometimes in these web spaces. And so, you know, in my research on technology and language learning, technology, media, language learning, which is the acronym I'm using here, access issues, we still can't presume that everyone has access. People all don't have bandwidth, same bandwidth issues. They may not have access to certain software or certain hardware. And it's really important, as we know these days, for critical digital literacy to be critical of what we're reading, because anyone can post something online, and to develop that critical literacy with it. The design of these online learning tools are really important. So there's this term UX design, user experience design, that's really crucial from a user perspective, that is user friendly, and really leveraging tech tool affordances for a certain context of teaching and also for student cohorts. And you read that in the Haynes article, her article. That's really, I think, a useful portrayal of our understanding of what affordances are and how we as teachers evolve understanding those affordances, how they change with use of a tool in a certain context and with feedback. And teachers and learners adopting new roles. And that's always been the case with technology, but it's really crucial. But we don't often think that our role changes, but it does dramatically when we're teaching in an online course. You know, we're much more a facilitator than a teacher. So it does change that way. And really the bottom line that I've come to in this research on technology is that it really depends on the teacher. And we'll see this in the results too, because often it's left up to us to determine if we're going to use any technology for our classes And if we are, how do we use it? It's up to us to do it. Often there are very few institutional guidelines directing us. And learners, from the research that we've been doing, learners want teachers online. They don't want to learn just from the tools. They want the teacher. They want that personal interaction. There were years ago, people worried that technology was going to replace teachers. Well, I don't see that happening yet. Maybe with, sort of AI, but that's still a long way off. But it does depend on us really curating these environments, really working with them effectively. So it does depend on the teacher. And so I'm going to end this lit review section of the presentation by this quote that really resonates with me still. Nina Garrett, she did the state-of-the-art article on language learning and technology in 2009. And she said, simply providing students with web links to authentic materials does not of itself constitute effective call. The real challenge is developing activities that will integrate authentic materials and engage students. We must think of new ways of doing new things with these new tools. So because it really is, the medium changes in which we're working. So it's like we're not working in a class, the walls, the space is different. So we need to really leverage that with these new tools in ways that make sense. So the project that we're working on now, the SSHRC funded project, is really, it's exploratory research. So it's really looking at what tech approaches are currently being used in a range of North American EAP contexts, and what are the perceived affordances, limitations, and the potential of these current and envisioned approaches that teachers, learners, and administrators see being used. So it's really exploratory research. The methods we're using, it's a multi-stage mixed methods research study that we're doing. So we started with an online survey that went out to teachers, administrators, not students, teachers and administrators in post-secondary institutions across North America. We got 134 responses back. We've been doing key informant interviews. So these are great researchers renowned in this field to have a look at what are their views about the future, the current uses of technology in EAP context. And then we've done site visits, which is often a missing piece in this type of research, that people ask get information from surveys, but they don't really see what's happening in classrooms. So this is what we've done. We've gone to 3 institutions, two in Canada, one in the US, 4 class observations, teacher event interviews, and student focus groups to try to get a range of perspectives from different stakeholders. And the theoretical lenses, some of the lenses that we're working with is this community of inquiry. Has anyone heard of this? Seen this community of inquiry framework? It's a really good framework. It's developed from in Alberta, University of Athabasca U, about online learning in general, not language learning, but online learning. And it talks about 3 presences. So it talks about the social presence, that is the way that students in online spaces can project who I am. Like, how do I present my identity in these spaces? And cognitive presence really is the use of communication to really understand content and work with it in a meaningful manner. So this is cognitive presence. The key, again, to these 2 presences is the teaching presence that is responsible for setting these other 2 up. And that is really this design facilitation of cognitive social processes to help realize learning outcomes for students in a context. So this, to me, this resonates beyond technology. I mean, it almost takes us into teaching in general, because, the sense of community, of connection is crucial in a language learning class. And this is even more so challenging to create online. Okay, so we're looking at these spaces through this lens, and we're also looking at it because we're looking at teacher beliefs. We're using this framework that I worked on through other research that others had done, looking at what are factors that create teacher beliefs or beliefs towards innovation. And what the research that's been done has shown is that past experience with an innovation, with a technology tool, influences our understanding of how effective that tool is in our teaching practice. And this is perceived effectiveness. This is cognitive. So it's what our mind understands to be really effective. And there are also attitudes towards innovation. We can say, whoa, that is way too complex for me to use right now. You know, we're setting up this Zoom thing, like yikes. You know, so there are these emotional attitudes, which is resistance, or can be excitement also. It can be very positive, like I really want to use that, I'm going to jump into it. And there are also these perceived expectations, which is what do my colleagues think? What have they been saying about this type of tool or technology use? Are they using technology in their class next door? I've heard some video or some YouTube use or something, you know, or something about an earpod or an app that they're using. And another really important factor with innovation is this sense of control, this perceived control, which is how much degree of control do we have, digital literacy, or am I gonna get up to the front of the class and start using this tool, then I'm not gonna be able to make it work. Okay, so this will really, these factors influence our intentions and our resulting actions on using these innovations in the class. Okay, and we'll see this emerge in the research from our survey research, so I'll revisit this when we talk about this. So the surveys, the demographics that we had, mostly Canadians responding. The other gaps in here are the Americans that we haven't put the percentages up. So they're either Canadian or American. Certain teachers and administrators have responded to the survey, largely female. You know, well experienced. I mean, as you can see, very, very qualified. I mean, a lot of masters and some PhD degrees with these respondents, so very well educated. What their beliefs toward technology, and we generalize this because they were common among teachers and administrators, is the vast majority believe that technology can enhance language programs and it can provide instructional opportunities. The majority agree that technology promotes collaboration, interaction, and enhances engagement. Most would like to see more technology use. Okay, so there was this proactive stance towards technology. One instructor said, of all the benefits technology in language classroom can provide, I think creating opportunities for students to take learning into their own hands is one of the primary benefits of this idea of autonomy and transferring learning outside of the class, extending it. And we'll come back to that because it was a continual theme in the research. When they talked about benefits in terms of teachers, it's interesting to compare teachers versus administrators, which we'll see in a moment, you know, and see the different lenses looking at this, and you'll understand sort of that perspective difference. But teachers saw it's access to authentic material. So we have YouTube, we have lots of listening resources, a lot of different resources that we can bring into the class. Increased opportunities for learning outside of class. Enhanced multimodal language input, so speaking, listening, reading, writing, kinesthetic, working with materials. Enhanced communication with the instructor, which students also said was big on their list of benefits because they have more connection to us using technology. From administrators, they saw the potential with technologies offering more pedagogical approaches, so the flipped classroom, online programs, blended or hybrid programs, enhancing student motivation, potentially fueling enrollment or fueling retention, wide variety of resources available, access to authentic materials, enhanced feedback on student work. So it can, I think, sort of, you can see themes of potential retention and enrollment in these responses potentially. From students said it can enhance engagement. We had one student last week when we were doing this site visit who said, you know, if the teacher's talking for an hour and a half, I'm going to start looking at my phone. But if she shows stuff on screen and talks about it, engages with us, then it keeps me more interested. But that really is good pedagogy too. You know, it results in pedagogy, not necessarily technology, just interactiveness with the class. Improving student-instructor communication, as we discussed. Student corrective feedback. They like the degree of feedback they were getting through technology that they haven't got in face-to-face environments. Individualized learning makes learning more relevant. They see it as relevant, the students that we've had in focus groups so far, but they're not all positive about technology. There are some, and we'll see some, who really prefer the face-to-face environment, even 20-year-olds. Okay, so there's not necessarily this age correlation as you know, people have presumed with technology. So we'll talk more about that. It's a little more complex. Additional reported benefits. Autonomy is a big factor, a big reported benefit. Instructional opportunities outside of class, motivating, engaging learners, improving collaborative opportunities via online tasks, online projects. Opportunities for feedback and assessment, screencasting that we talked about, self-reflection, and some teachers talked about the degree of metacognitive reflection that they saw happening with their classes that they wouldn't normally see, because students have time to really look at the writing, look at other students' writing, and writing or peer feedback. Varied instructional materials, so there is you know, a chance with apps, with Quizlet, different apps, to really engage students in interactive presentations where you're engaging them with what you're talking about through these tools. You know, we did this word cloud to really portray the most frequently used technologies, which is interesting because really nothing is really that innovative here. We have computer projector, Blackboard, which is the learning management system, although, you know, I shouldn't always interpret it that way. You know, it could be just the Blackboard, which is, I guess, a form of older technology. You know, so these tended to be, and we've seen this also in the site visits, these are the technologies that are often being used. First of all, they're ones that are available in the classes that we teach in. You know, I mean, and there's some classes where we as teachers, we have to do this at York sometimes, roll in the card with the technology on it and then plug it in, set it up, and let it go. So it's not always outfitted in the space. We did some organizing and categorization of some of the apps and tools that were used, and we really saw there were the institutionally managed technologies like the learning management systems, Moodle, Desire to Learn, smart boards that are in classes. There are also those tools used for productive skills that teachers are using, like online writing, using blogs, discussion forums that can enhance writing opportunities, using presentation tools like Prezi or even PowerPoint. Integrated skills, social networking. So there are chances some teachers were using Zoom, using video conferencing. Surveying was quite common, polling in the class. Using tools for out-of-class work, like a flipped classroom model. E-portfolios, different tools that they use to encourage this out-of-class work. And then form-focused instruction, there was some discussion of using apps to really focus on linguistic form, on grammar, that we can't always cover easily in the class. And we can individualize instruction. There were some thoughts expressed about pedagogy, and usually it's sort of critical analysis of technology. So one teacher says using technology is not a goal in itself and must always be kept in mind that technology is to be used only when it enhances learning, either the outcomes or the enjoyment of the process. So again, looking into the affordances of these tools. An administrator says not about wanting to see more technology used in EAP for the sake of doing so. It all depends on pedagogical value. So this idea of affordances, really matching the affordances with the learning outcomes in your class and using technology that way, and not succumbing to the wow factor, the bells and whistles that can be appealing initially. There was this need for thoughtful design that's come up a lot in the site visits also. that collaboration in my class is the result of my task design, not the technology. Just as technology can enhance our personal lives, it can enhance teaching and learning, but only in the hands of a thoughtful instructor. A bad worksheet on a screen is still a bad worksheet. You know, so that makes a lot of sense. And the pedagogical rationale, we only saw a few responses in this area, but there was one instructor who said technology can help facilitate differentiation in the class. It can be really useful with multi-level class. Students love their smartphones. Anything that's possible to help them learn with it works for me. So recognizing that students bring these resources in, how can I use them in my teaching? The use of these mediated approaches adds more variability and so is more engaging and interactive. And this idea of engagement was a common theme that was brought up by instructors. Constraints inhibiting tech use, what we found is that still there's a wide variety of infrastructure that's available in language learning, EAP learning context. Some institutions did report outdated, slow technology. Tech support varies widely. Digital literacy among teachers and students, and even there were a lot of comments even from students saying that I need help with how to use this. Even though I'm very technologically savvy with certain applications, I may not be savvy in terms of language learning with technology or learning in an educational online space. There were some negative attitudes toward technology. Gimmicky, competes with face-to-face communication. Time is a huge factor that has been a factor all the time we've had technology around, but it often takes us as teachers a lot of time to prepare for tech use in our classes. You know, sometimes when I'm teaching at York, we have blended EAP classes and we have face-to-face classes, and I really sometimes in my heart think, I hope I get a face-to-face class where I don't have to use a load of technology, because it's a lot more work. It can be a lot more work. And privacy concerns are increasingly important. You know, we have some students through video record lessons, but may not ask permission of other students they get in those videos. And you may not know if someone is recording something, you know, this type of thing. Lack of training also was a big factor, and we'll talk about training because these one-shot workshops on technology tend not to be seen as effective. Teachers want more mentoring, they want peer mentoring, certain training, that type of professional development. You know, this EAP instructor said at our institution, technology is very outdated, slow, often doesn't work properly. Being able to execute lessons planned around technology is a crapshoot daily, as we're assigned different classes each day. And if we're teaching sessionally, you know, we often don't know the resources until we get into the classroom, and then they may be quite distinct. I remember I was teaching a tech course and a grad course at York, and I had, I think, a 2000 like PC, a desktop locked into the corner away from the class, and then a screen I had to pull down over the blackboard and a projector in the middle. And I thought, how I'm supposed to look in the corner and operate the system, and my students are here, and it was crazy. Anyway, but I'm not gonna complain about York too much. Yeah, I will a break though if you ask me. Yeah, but negative attitudes. So this idea of gimmicky technologies, the bells and whistles, can be quite, you know, this wow factor can be deceiving, and the perception that technology takes away from face-to-face interactions that was expressed by students and teachers. The perception that technology used in the EAP classroom results in lower teacher evaluation scores. That was brought up by a couple of teachers. It was an interesting comment. And this idea that technology encourages students to accomplish tasks in isolation. This isolating aspect of technology emerged a couple of times. The time aspect that we've talked about, so time to learn a new technology and time to figure out how to apply it in this context to orient students and to really support students with this aspect in their classes. And the demographics, they need to tailored my technology use according to class demographics. You know, I only use certain tools when I know my students are comfortable using technology. Otherwise, the class becomes a lesson on how to use technology and not on learning, practicing language skills. Although I have had teachers say that that can be an activity, a language learning activity in itself, working on how to use technology. So it depends on, you know, what our goals are and how we use it. Privacy concerns are an increasing issue. This came up certainly with social media, with teachers being and administrators being less interested in using social media in the classroom, and also gamification, gaming apps. But this idea of privacy and sort of information privacy came up quite a bit. In terms of training, the training teachers said that the training they tend to get is on technology, not on how to use it in teaching. So not with the pedagogy aspect of technology. And not on an ongoing basis. I may have had a workshop 6 months ago on how to use a smartboard, but I haven't had one, and now all of a sudden I had one, and I've forgotten what that workshop dealt with and how to get going with it. So I sometimes need someone near me who I can call on, who can support me as I'm going through this process. And that's why peer mentoring has emerged as really a more ideal approach to training that could be helpful. With admin, the constraints were the resources that are expensive to sort of, get into these classrooms, the IT workload that can be split between content teachers and language teachers that our needs tend to be quite different. Financial resources, digital literacy, admin said there's some degree of instructor pushback against technology in some ways, because it does take more time, and often teachers aren't paid for it. And that can be a big factor. You know, do we want to use that when we're not being paid for it? If I'm sessional, working in multiple institutions, do I really have time to really integrate this? Especially if I'm not being paid. And so there are these factors that emerge. This admin said there's a range among our faculty in terms of their enthusiasm for and comfort with new technologies. Again, if teachers want to be competitive, they shouldn't be struggling to save a Word doc. So a comment on digital literacy, but you know, it depends on the context, on what we're comfortable with as teachers. There are some emerging tensions in the data that we're seeing. You know, we have some teachers believing that the technology doesn't require a lot of time, but some saying it does. So we're curious to what the disconnect is, or what the differences are in those teaching contexts, maybe it's teachers' backgrounds, this type of thing. Teachers believing that institutions have adequate technical infrastructure, but others do not. You know, there can be quite a bit of variability in these contexts in which we teach. Teachers that believe they have enough training, but others feel constrained by a lack of training. So these contradictions, these tensions that exist. We also saw some differences with how teachers see some of these issues versus how admins see them. So teachers say, you know, generally said we're adequately digitally literate, whereas admins said they're concerned about teachers' digital literacy. You know, teachers saying we're willing to undertake training without compensation, but admins saying there's instructor pushback because of lack of compensation. There were on both sides, teachers and admin, there were concerns about digital gaming, lack of clarity on how we can use that in the class. You know, even though it's talked about quite extensively in the literature as being motivating. What we did, because we had good Likert scale data from our surveys, we did a factor analysis on the Likert scale data to try to see what factors, really what constructs were shaping the responses in this Likert scale belief system data that we had. So what we did this factor analysis, there emerged 3 factors, and if you remember the framework we looked at earlier, the first biggest factor that emerged describing these variables was really this perception of technology's educational effectiveness. So an example of a statement that supported this, that loaded heavily on this factor, was technology improves my language teaching practice. Okay, so these are these statements in the survey that connected to this theme around how I perceive the educational effectiveness of technology in my teaching practice. And the second big factor was the emotional, the affective dimension of how I feel towards technology. Do I feel threatened by it, or do I feel excited, or do I feel both? And the factor that came up in this survey data were insecurities, concerns around technology use in EAP. And a sample statement that exemplified that factor was, I don't feel confident using technology in my language classroom. And the third factor was, again, this perceived control over technology. So this described about 8% of this data. And this is, I have inadequate technology infrastructure in my class. Okay, so this is teachers really not having enough control over what we have available to work with. So it was interesting because the two factors 1 and 2, are reported in other research around teacher belief systems towards innovation. Not always technology, but other innovation. So what we think we understand, what we understand to be the effectiveness of this innovation in our practice, and the emotional, the affective dimension of this innovation, and what that sort of entails, our concerns or excitement around something. So it was interesting to see that. We also did a little sort of multiple regression analysis on the demographic factors. We looked at age, gender, location, teaching experience, with how they connect with these factors that appeared in the data. Okay, the perceived effectiveness, the concerns about technology use, and we had teaching experience. The more experienced teachers had, generally the more they thought positively about technology use in EAP. Okay, which probably isn't surprising, because then we're comfortable with our practice, and we may be willing to take risks and chances with technology. Education had a generally positive correlation with our perception around effectiveness of technology, except with doctoral people with PhDs, which you'll find intriguing. And they tended to be more critical around technology use, okay, which may not be surprising. And not surprising, increasing age tended to result in increasing concerns or insecurities about technology, even though we have to take this with a grain of salt, because I've seen teachers who are older who use technology way more than some younger teachers. So we have to be careful of that native digital immigrant binary that's been proposed years ago in the literature and is increasingly critiqued, because it really isn't always the case. So the emerging issues we're working with right now is this big issue around pedagogy. That is a big factor. It's sort of the elephant in the room with this research, that teachers talk about. We talk about technology, but we really haven't been told, or we're really inadequately informed as to how we need to change our teaching practice to use technology. If our roles are changing, if we're teaching completely online and our students are working quite autonomously, how do we adjust our practice with that? And there were a few respondents. I mean, you saw some giving pedagogical rationales behind their EAP tech use, and we have been asking more about that in the site visits. Really, this factor that results from teacher belief research, we're very practical, we're very pragmatic, and there's this practicality ethic we use to judge innovation. If it's going to give us more advantage, if it's going to help us meet our teaching needs more effectively, then we'll use it. But if it's going to take more time, or it's not going to be practical, we tend not to use it, okay? Or if we're resistant towards it that way. So there is a practicality ethic that's been talked about in teacher beliefs that we use to judge innovations and devices that we consider integrating into our practice. There were teachers, though, in the sites that talked about they need to be current, and they need to use technology to connect with my students in the class. So there is that aspect. The recognition of enhanced engagement. So these are some factors we've been seeing in the site visits. But there is a lack of clarity around what pedagogy underlies technology use when I'm using it in a teaching context. And does technology drive the teaching, or am I using it from a critically informed pedagogical perspective? So those factors that are big factors that are talked about in the literature too, that we're going to be working with. You know, and we had this, initially we kept reading about state-of-the-art technology, you know, and thinking, well, that must be the latest technology, like VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. But we're rethinking that because we've seen some really innovative uses of just projecting an image on a screen, with teachers really working with that quite innovatively in their classes, you know, and examining whether really state-of-the-art technology could be extended to just using a range of technologies in innovative ways pedagogically, whether that is more reflective of state-of-the-art technology use in language teaching and learning. So, you know, this sort of automatic sort of thinking that state-of-the-art has to be latest app or latest technology. You know, and there is this other aspect that we've been working with in this research, that is it possible for us as teachers to really envision new approaches using like virtual reality if we've never used it? Can we really imagine what its potential is if we really haven't used it? We did research on a different project with this teacher that had worked 10 years teaching languages in Second Life, so a virtual reality program that some of you may be familiar with. And she taught French to secondary school students. And what she'd do is she'd go into Second Life with a French-speaking colleague, interact, they'd look at different homes, go into different towns in Second Life, and they'd interact in this virtual reality world on the screen in front of their students. She projected on a screen so our students would see it. But it is really, if any of you who's been in virtual reality environments before, yeah, so it is quite dramatic, and it's quite distinct from what we really envision as possible in teaching, because you can fly, you can run around, you can change body and become an animal right in your seat, which some students did in this class we observed. So, you know, it is, and there's a different dimension of space and time in these environments. So it is quite innovative. I mean, can you envision what that would bring to my practice if you haven't done it? So there are these factors, this envisioning dilemma that we're looking at in terms of, and not necessarily technology, but innovation, educational innovation. You know, the same goes for plurilingualism. I think if you haven't seen it, can you really imagine what its potential is? You know? So I'll end with these quotes from some of the participants we've had in the research. This one learner said, you need to speak to learn a language. You know, she was against using technology, so she really missed the chance to speak when the teacher was putting some work online. And this was a sort of typical 20-year-old student. One instructor said, not more technology, but more effective and meaningful technology. One administrator said, like all higher education institutions, our upper-level administrators think technology is the answer to every problem. I won't say anything more about that. So I'm happy to take any questions. You can have a look at our website there. It's pretty rudimentary. We apologize in advance. But I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Thank you for this talk, and I'll open the floor. I'm sure